This is a great time in the UFO field to be active. There's a lot going on. I don't know if anyone can truly predict where this is going to lead. And I'm not saying it's going to lead toward disclosure.
Right.
I actually don't think so. But I do think that there's a permanent forward motion that we've just had. And I guess the question that I ask myself these days is, will we get to a point where we hit some kind of critical mass that in which what we're seeing now becomes harder and harder to control? I think say what I like the most about what you said there is working together. And that's really what we have to do. Like, I do the things that I can do, and I love doing it, by the way. And you're doing what you can do. And there's people watching this, and they're going to be doing what they can do. And all I would say is let's try to be careful, cautious, but also brave. Like, we've got to be all of those things. And follow the evidence. And analyze it, be critically minded, but also be brave enough to accept conclusions when the evidence points that way.
Greetings and welcome to the Vortex. I'm your host, Daniel Allen Jones, and I'm very honored to be here with Richard Dolan.
Daniel, glad to do this with you.
It's great to have you here. You've done some amazing work, and this is something that, when it comes to the phenomenon of UFOs and unidentified aerial phenomenon and things that are seen all throughout the world, there's so much information out there. And here in the last few years, we've had the revealing of a program, AATIP, which you've done a great job of covering the information, the defense documents, things that have come out, and showing that there is a vested interest on the behalf of the military and the government here in the United States of investigating this phenomenon in a way that shows that there is legitimacy to what's being explored when it comes to the phenomenon, that it's not just imaginary, and so it helps to show for people who are otherwise not in the know that maybe there is something to it. What is your thought on how what AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, is doing to play a role in helping our understanding of what UFO information, sightings, reports is doing in our modern time?
Well, what AATIP proves is that despite all the denials through the last several decades, when people would ask the U.S. government if they're investigating UFOs, the U.S. government always said, no, we're not investigating UFOs. And then we learned, just in last December 2017, that, oh no, there is this program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP, and it took at least a few $1 million, not a lot of money in Pentagon speak, but enough money that it was investigating UFO sightings that the U.S. military was encountering. And in fact, what we learned, and George Knapp, a journalist who's actually done the most public investigation of this, I would say, pointed out that the AATIP program itself was a truncated version of a program known as OSAP, and that was actually a much more expansive program that was also being run out of the Pentagon that was investigating a much wider range of weirdness and UFO type activity.
Right.
But AATIP, sort of the shortened, smaller version of it, very much confined to military sightings of UFOs. And no, it's quite interesting. So, it's been very controversial even since it's come out, but the controversy is this anything more than a sweetheart deal that Harry Reid and Robert Bigelow worked out, or is there actually something to it? I would say there's something to it, and it does show that elements within the U.S. military have been continuing to take UFOs seriously. One of the things I think is fascinating about it is, and this is something I talked about here this weekend, the revelations of Dr. Hal Puthoff. He's someone that I actually do know, and I can talk a little bit about Hal Puthoff to some extent. I've communicated with him very much over the years. But Puthoff was he was working with Bigelow in AATIP, and the capacity that Puthoff did is he solicited future tech papers from scientists in various technical fields as a way of understanding what UFO technology might involve in an array of areas. In terms of space-time metric engineering, in terms of traversable wormholes and negative energy and dark matter and so forth.
This
what
would
he-
be like the work of Eric Davis, Dr. Eric Davis.
That's right. Eric Davis was involved and a lot of other scientists as well. And what Puthoff did as part of AATIP was he solicited these futuristic science papers from a lot of these experts to get a sense of what some of this UFO tech might involve. Puthoff did not say to them, by the way, this is part of a UFO program in the Pentagon.
Right.
But he told them everything else and basically had them write what you would call white papers. And the fact that they wrote these amazing papers that, by the way, are of high value within the Joint Chiefs servers, or the JWICS server, says a lot to me that this was something that was very, very important. But the other thing that we've learned is that the AATIP program was involved in investigating genuine sightings of what they called advanced aerospace vehicles, AAVs or UFOs. And they developed conclusions. So Bigelow Aerospace, which was the main contractor to the AATIP program, came up with its own conclusions, which George Knapp published in one of his news stories in, I think it was May of 2018. And it's quite interesting. And they just said, look, these AAVs exhibit capabilities that we just don't understand. We don't have a science to explain this. You know, instant acceleration, super fast speeds. All of the things that we've, in UFO research, have known that the U.S. military has been encountering. Bigelow Aerospace is doing their own study here. Undoubtedly, Puthoff was involved in this study, and I'm sure a number of other people, probably Eric Davis. And their conclusion is, we have no way of explaining what these objects are able to do.
Right.
And that comes out in May of 2018. That's very interesting. So really, I think what we can say about AATIP is that the revelations of AATIP, and really all of this has happened through To the Stars Academy, TTSA. Let's give them some credit. Tom DeLonge and Luis Elizondo. But those revelations coming out, it's like one bomb after another that's been dropping, telling the public about significant secret studies of UFOs and how they continue to be unexplained in any conventional sense. So to me, what's interesting about all of this isn't that these UFO stories are unique in the long history of UFO sightings. They're not really. I mean, the Tic Tac UFO encounter of 2004 is a great sighting, but is it better than some of the sightings that were recorded in the 1940s and 50s and 60s? Not necessarily. There's some amazing sightings back then. But what's different now is that this has come out with some kind of semi-official sanction here. And it's as if it's now considered permissible for the mainstream culture to be talking about this.
Right.
That's the sea change, that we're able to have this conversation about these UFOs, AAVs, UAP, whatever the acronym you want to use for them. We're able to talk about them without the automatic cue the X-Files music, cue the ridicule, and they're being taken more and more seriously. It's an amazing thing.
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, from CNN to Fox and the newspapers like the New York Times and Politico, they're talking about this in a serious way.
It's great to see this being brought into that public light, like you said, in a way that's not always just giving that pop culture baggage of just silly Hollywood, alien, spaceship type things, because this is a very serious issue that is being investigated. But there is something that is a bit of a controversy when people discuss Tom DeLonge and, like you said, To the Stars Academy, and how their operations are affecting what is being referred to as controlled disclosure. How, in your mind, do you find that this is going to be something that will affect our ability to receive this information in a way that otherwise the gatekeepers out there are preventing?
I think, I'm pretty sure that I coined the phrase controlled disclosure earlier in 2019 or maybe 2018, and I think it's a good phrase, actually. The question is, I'm actually still not sure if it accurately applies to TTSA or not. And the reason is it has everything to do with whether or not TTSA is controlled by something higher up.
Right.
So if they are, then yeah, we're looking at a controlled form of disclosure. So what do I mean by that? I guess I would say is if we go on the assumption that there is a control group that's got more information on this UFO phenomenon than the rest of us, They've got the data, they've got the power. So they've got to come to a conclusion at some point that this is a secret that's impossible to keep forever. At some point, this secret's going to come out. We've had 25 years basically of the web. We've had 15 years of social media, roughly speaking. And the world is just a different place. And everything's speeding up. And I think it is becoming harder and harder to contain things. So if you have that as an assumption, then you would assume, well, secret's going to come out, let us control the spin, we will control this disclosure. So that's the basic idea. And I think it is possible if the government or the black budget people were to roll this out, the only way that they would want to do it is if they knew they had control over all the spin, all the propaganda. That means control YouTube, control the web, control major media, which they've already got that, but control the rest of the digital world. And I've been theorizing about this for the last 10 years. But back in 2012, 2013, I couldn't yet see how it would be possible to control, say, YouTube.
Right.
Or Google searches. Now it's really not hard to see that at all because we can see that it's happening. They're skewing the algorithms. They are starting to clamp down. Facebook's doing the same thing. So if they get to a point where the web is truly under enough control that they're confident that they've got domination over the spin, I could see a limited controlled rollout of a disclosure coming from official sanctioned sources. Now what I see about TTSA is probably something a little different, I think, right now. My take on TTSA is, I said this earlier today in the conference there, is I see them actually as a faction.
Right.
So I don't see them as on the puppet strings of CIA paymasters. Some people do. I'm not there. I see them as a genuine group, a coordinated group of guys with top secret clearances. They've got their own motivations for their form of a limited form of disclosure. So this is their controlled disclosure.
Right.
And what they have to do is, because if their motivations would include maybe declassifying some secret tech so that maybe they can get access to it. That's a total possibility. So that they can monetize it, maybe. Maybe they can get government grants because they've got some smart scientists who might be able to work with those technologies. I'm speculating here, but there's certainly people like Putoff and Eric Davis and Christopher Mellon. Like, these are people with long-standing security clearances, and you can see that they would have motivations for pushing this forward.
Yeah.
So if they do that, they could use allies within the media, allies within the Pentagon to help them move it along, allies to help them declassify certain documents, certain videos. They've declassified 3. We know there's many more videos that have not yet been declassified.
Right.
So they got some, but not all. They got friends in the media, Leslie Kean and others, who were able to push to get articles written in the mainstream. So to me, they've got allies, but they've also got opponents. This is what I see. So there is a control there, and of course they're rebranding UFOs, UAP and AAV, and all of these phrases. And you have guys like Elizondo going on shows like Unidentified and saying, we don't know what these things are. Well, I'm sorry, but you probably have a pretty damn good idea of what they are. But he said, well, maybe they're Russian, maybe they're Chinese, they're a potential national security threat. To me, that's all political fiction. I think we can understand why. I mean, they've got to work their way through this labyrinth of very hostile people, hostile media, hostile political people, hostile scientific community, and they're trying to get someone's attention. So they've got to reboot UFOs, as it were, into something different. UAP, something mysterious, something as if we've just discovered that these things, we don't know what they are, pretending that there's been no history of the last 70 years of UFOs. So that's where you can understand their motivations, but there's danger, there's danger. How far will they go with this and really transform the history of this phenomenon and basically siphon out and sanitize all of the past? So that, I think, is a danger. I don't think of it as yet a great danger because I think it's really not possible to do that And I'm also seeing signs within the membership of TTSA that they're going kind of far now. You have Elizondo making a statement on Fox with Tucker Carlson earlier this year, stating that yes, we recovered crash, for lack of a better word, crash UFO. He actually made the statement on May 31st. That's kind of an incredible thing to say.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, unofficially, actually officially, Eric Davis, the very next day, issued a statement to someone confirming that. He says, yes. He said, Luis Elizondo is 1,000% correct on that. It's like, wow.
Well, that's really interesting to see how...
So they're going further and further. Like,
yeah.
They're not just staying put with this very safe, sanitized UAP definition. So they are starting to push it forward.
It's incredible to see, and how that's affecting, like you said, the nature of what's already been established for the last several decades with non-government programs, people that are involved with, maybe civilian operations, just trying to do this work in a way that's helping for other people who have had experiences, or just doing something to understand what's going on in the bigger picture of the UFO issue. So when we deal with this sense of controlled disclosure, and whether that's, they said, footage, files, whether it may be metamaterial studies and information, exploiting that to the extent of engineering capabilities, there's so much that this could be dealing with. But sometimes it might not be affecting things in the same way. Let's say if something happens to get released or leaked inadvertently, and so of course this touches upon what is being described, and I think you refer to as one of the greatest things of the century.
One of the greatest leaks. It's the greatest UFO leak of the century. You're talking about the Wilson memo, the Wilson document, written by Dr. Eric Davis. Now, let's talk about this. This is something that was not planned by anyone. This was an accident of history.
Right.
And definitely the people who are named in this document, like Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff, and some other people, they did not want this out. This was not welcome for them. But unfortunately for them, as I've told this to Hal Puthoff anyway, I said, well, it's just too bad it's out.
Yeah.
But these came from the files of the late Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was also one of these. There's all in the same club. I call them the Bigelow Club, the NIDS Club. In the 1990s and early 2000s, these individuals coalesced around Robert Bigelow, Puthoff, and Dr. Kip Green, and Edgar Mitchell, and Colm Kelleher, and Eric Davis. They all had various security clearances. They all were, in my view of this, and I know I'm right here, all these men were working their way into the labyrinth, trying to get to the core secrets of the UFO phenomenon. They all knew it was real, and they all had some knowledge, but not enough.
Right.
And they wanted it. And particularly in the 90s and early 2000s, they were very actively communicating with each other. This is obvious now. So in the case of Edgar Mitchell, he dies in January 2017. And he left a lot of correspondence. And I have a very good understanding of how some of his papers left. And I'm saying this carefully in deference to the wishes of privacy of the person who possesses these papers. Who, by the way, I don't know who that man is. It's a man. I say that. But there's a lot that I don't know about this person. But I do know that he was able to get Mitchell's NIDS, that is National Institute of Discovery Science papers, his ions papers, his consciousness papers, legally above board with permission of the family. And my understanding is that those papers were going to be destroyed.
Wow.
Right. And this person said, please, no, basically. And that's what happened. So then you have a whole period of time where he and a couple of trusted friends of his know about these papers, and they're thinking, what on earth do we do with these?
Right.
It's kind of a big thing. Well, so some of them, I believe, digitized a small number. I don't know how much, but I think some have been digitized. One of those documents is what I'm calling the Wilson document. And just to give a little backstory, I've said this a number of times, but I saw 2 of those pages back in 2006. Now, and by one of the members of that circle who showed me 2 pages. And the 2 pages that I saw, this individual described to me the basic scenario, which was that in 1997, Dr. Stephen Greer, along with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, and a couple of other people, met with a prominent individual in the government. And I didn't know who this person was immediately. I figured it out later. It was Admiral Thomas R. Wilson, who was head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. April of 97, they get a meeting with Wilson. It's kind of an amazing thing. This is actually all Stephen Greer. He was pushing this. He was making the rounds in D.C., and he gets a meeting with a powerful person on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he's talking to him about UFO secrecy. And he gives a presentation. As a result of this, Wilson starts looking around within the Pentagon for a special access program that is a classified program dealing with reverse engineering alien tech, and after almost 2 months, finds it. This is a very truncated version of the story.
Yeah.
And anyway, so what I was shown back in 06 were 2 pages of what turned out to be Eric Davis's interview of Wilson. Davis interviewed Wilson in 2002, 5 years later. Gets Wilson to talk. I was shown 2 of those pages where Wilson is actually describing how upset he was over being denied access to this program for oversight, which he believed he had legal authority to do. And he was denied access. And that this program was involved in reverse engineering ET tech, and the phrase that I saw at the time is that Wilson described it as not made on Earth, not by human hands, not made by man. And right, and I saw that and I thought, wow, just like you were saying. I learned a few other things at that time, which was that this was basically a private company dominated thing. This is not U.S. government. He was upset and he was locked out, and that was the end of it for him. I actually phoned Admiral Wilson a couple of months later when I found out who this was, and I did a very impolite ambush interview of him. There was no other way for me to talk to him. And once he found out what I was calling about, he was very upset, actually. And
oh, wow, you really?
His voice got very high pitched, and he said yes, yes. He eventually admitted that he met with Mitchell and Greer. He said nothing came out of that. Everything else that you're saying is poppycock, and he hung up the phone.
Huh.
That was it. Yeah, I've talked about this over time.
Yeah.
But anyway, so back to Edgar Mitchell's papers. So Mitchell had a full copy of this transcript, which turned out to be 13 pages plus 2 additional papers that were put in there. And by the late part of 2018, one individual, and his name is known, and I've talked with him, and his name is James Rigney. He's a very good guy, and he's, as far as I can see, the second in line on the chain of custody here. James met with Grant Cameron at a conference in the U.S. in late 2018. This is less than 1 year ago from now. And Grant was just getting ready to leave the conference. James shows him on his phone digitized versions of the full memo. And Grant knew right away that this was significant. And one thing leads to another, and I don't think Grant really knew what to do with it. He didn't want to publish it. And there's a small number of researchers who had copies of this. One of them puts it on Reddit and on Imgur, which is basically just JPEGs, very quietly there. And there's a very, very quiet conversation about this that's happening. And it was leaked to me by one of those people. I still don't know who, by the way, in April of 2019. And I remember talking with Grant Cameron about it, and Grant said, yep, now you're in the same box I'm in. It's exactly what it was.
Right.
And I thought to myself, this has got to come out. This has got to come out. And it was a tricky situation. Like, I knew it was going to come out. My attitude was, I didn't want to be the one to leak it. But I was also determined that if it didn't leak within a certain period of time, that I would have done it. So, but I didn't have to, it turns out. And I don't know who the person was, but somehow this started making the rounds in early June, along with another leaked document that was from Mitchell's files, the so-called alien autopsy email thread, which is also interesting. But in my view, the Wilson document is way more interesting. And once I saw that that was making email rounds, then I took the initiative to just put it out there. And I made a pretty big announcement on my YouTube channel, and I wrote a long article about it, and that's what actually made this a big news item in the UFO community. So yeah, I've been associated with it as a result of that, but I really should point out that there's a lot of individuals that have been involved with this document. So one thing I just want to say about it is, that's a long backstory, but the content of this document. All right, so I got statements from Hal Puthoff, I got a statement from Kit Green, Dr. Christopher Green. Official and unofficial statements. The official statement from Puthoff is really worth reading carefully. I consider it a gift. And essentially it's a very, very extended, almost an apology as to why he can't comment on the document.
Right, yeah, well.
You know, we all have national security clearances. We can't talk about this document. Kit Green, very similar. Kit Green gave me an extended, long, 15, 20-minute off-the-record answer to his response on that document. We had a long, long conversation about this. And although I've agreed that I won't say to the world what his statement is, I do have permission to say that he gave me a long off-the-record statement.
Yeah.
And suffice to say that, suffice to say that these people all know that this is real. Right? They all know. Everyone. Of course they do. All you have to do is read through the document carefully. I mean, there are researchers now who are going through all of the details of what is in that long transcribed conversation that Eric Davis wrote out. And there's a wealth of data to be diving into, accurate, detailed information. So yeah, I think what the Wilson document really shows is that you have a high-level member of the Joint Chiefs who mistakenly believed that he had authority over a special access program to that had to do with reverse engineer ET tech. And that's in fact what he was able to get an audience with the three top managers of the program. And they did say that much to him. They said, yeah, look, we're making painfully slow progress on this. This is really difficult. This is very, very hard for us, but we've got a team, we're working on this. It's all private contractor stuff, hardly any U.S. government people involved. And they said, no, and you can't be, you're not in, sorry.
Well,
he said, why, what are the criteria? They said, well, we don't really have to tell you that, you're not allowed in. It was almost really a courtesy call that they were allowing him because he stumbled onto the program and they had to deal with him in some way or another. So they gave him this much information, but they said, no, you're out, you're not in. And he said, well, I'm just going to complain up the chain of command. They said, fine, go ahead. And he did, and he was threatened with his career.
That's incredible.
They said, look, yeah, you want to complain about this, good luck. You'll take an early retirement, you'll never get to be director of the DIA, and you'll lose a couple of stars along the way, so that's your call. And he was angry, he was upset, but he sucked it up and he played ball, became DIA director, retired in 2002, went off to work in private industry, and I guarantee you he's probably got more and better security clearances now than he had when he was a DIA. So that's what happens, you have to learn to play the game.
That's really amazing. So in closing, with all of these things that have been coming forward, and there's still so much happening in many different facets of the UFO world and the different groups, researchers, experiencers, there's so many different angles. How can we use discernment to really navigate what's going on with the direction this is taking us in? Should we try to press Congress? Should we try to get involved with groups? Should we just sit back and watch what happens and wait for more releases? Where do we go from here?
So it's, yes, good questions, plural. You get a lot of questions involved in there. So first is, how do we discern? How do we evaluate, make decisions? And it's, I think it was Putoff years ago who said to me, it's like being in a hall of mirrors, and it's tough. The only thing that we can do to be sure is cautiously examine verifiable evidence. So by that, simply, when you are presented with a piece of evidence, it's got to be amenable to outside investigation to some extent. In other words, what I don't like, what I don't consider evidence is someone's story. A good campfire story is not good enough for me.
Yeah.
So there's got to be something that allows us to provide follow-up investigation. So in the case of the Wilson document, there's actually an enormous amount of information that's fully available for anyone to dive in and investigate and to confirm or not confirm. So, and if it's fruitful, if it yields more information, then that's good, and we stay with it. So I think, it's simple rules of journalism, simple rules of historical analysis. That is, you find out what's the source, you know what the sources are, you try to get as much corroboration as possible, and you work it from there. It's a messy game, but there's no better way to do that.
Right.
So it's evaluate evidence that can be openly examined by independent individuals. The other part you were asking had to do with moving ahead in terms of sort of getting this out in the open in an official capacity, some kind of disclosure. You mentioned Congress. I don't think Congress has any power in this at all. I think in that sense the wheels have fallen off, and I don't see that we, the public, have an easy path toward getting control over this. I would like that to be the case. Like I believe in that, and I know you believe in that. We need to have a system, a political system that's responsive to us. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of having a republic,
right,
and having some kind of democratic system, is you have a government that's responsive to the people, not reverse.
Yeah, we'd like to think if we could put pressure on them that they would be more confronting of the issue and address it in a way, but maybe that might not happen the way we'd like to think.
Well, what it looks like to me is that, legally speaking, I don't think this is widely understood, but legally speaking, I think that we are locked out of a lot of this. So I think a lot of this has become privatized. Like in the case of what the Wilson document shows, I think very clearly is that even Pentagon people, forget Congress, even people within the Pentagon don't really have oversight over this. And the understanding that I got on this, by the way, from Dr. Kid Green, when I did a long interview with him about this very issue, he pointed out to me that there was a significant reform done within the Pentagon in the early 90s by Secretary of Defense William Perry, who, by the way, is still alive. He's 95 years old now. Perry, back in the early 90s, in the first Clinton administration, did a reorg of the SAPs, of the Special Access Programs, to make them even less amenable to public oversight and even less amenable to Pentagon oversight. Apparently, this is what Green said. So we'll have to have researchers double check that, but that's what it looks like. The point is that these programs are, some people next to us, are not legally amenable to our oversight. So we have a long way to go if we want to get access to this. It's not impossible, but our system, this isn't the governmental system that you and I grew up in school learning about.
Yeah.
We've come a long way from that. And so we've got to find a way legally to change things so that we can get better access. I don't think it's impossible. There seems to be a way that a few government employees are able to get access to it, but it seems to be very, very limited, and probably not something that ordinary people will have access to. Now, but there's another way. We're in an era where information is squeezing out of the tube, bit by bit. And it could very well be, I wrote about this 10 years ago in a book, After Disclosure, and
amazing book, by the way.
Thanks. Well, it was an experiment. It was a thought experiment with my co-author Bryce Abel, and back then we were thinking, how could a disclosure happen? How might how might UFO secrecy ever end? And if it ended, what then? And what we thought back then, this is in 09 and 2010 when we wrote it, was some unforeseen event, a leak, something that the secret keepers didn't foresee, because I didn't see any motivation on their part for them to let this out. It's too revolutionary. So fast forward now, and we are in an era where there are some leaks happening, both controlled and uncontrolled. The folks at TTSA, in my view, are working their way through a very careful little maze. They're treading carefully to get a very measured message out to the world. And so far they haven't failed. So far they're succeeding little by little. But then there's these other leaks. And the reason, by the way, the TTSA people don't like the leak of the Wilson document is because, well, their names, many of them are the same people, and this is an awkward leak for them. It's not something that comports with the very clean, sanitized message that they've been trying to put out there.
Exactly.
This is much more hardcore. So, but the fact is, nothing they can do about it. I actually I told a couple of them, I said, look, you might as well just own this.
I think it's become clear, come forward.
Yeah, but they're not doing it yet. So they know where I stand on this. I know exactly where they stand on this. We understand each other, but they're going to follow the policy that they feel is best for their purposes. And for right now, that means not owning that document.
Right, unfortunately. Well, it seems like with all the information coming out, people need to be able to utilize resources that can be used to make sense of everything happening. And you've done an amazing job of putting these things together in your books and the videos that you put out on your channel. So how can people find out more about your work?
Oh, thanks. Well, I have two websites. I have a publishing website called Richard Dolan Press, where I've got my books. I publish books by other really great authors, and that's all easily, readily available there. I have some articles on there, older things that I've written. The current website that I'm really putting a lot of effort to is a pay site, so sorry guys. It's called richarddolanmembers.com, although I have a lot of free information there too. There's a lot of free content. But I've worked that site very diligently, I have to say, and it's what I like about it. Actually, I like the fact that it's a limited audience, because it gives me personally a little more flexibility, a little more leeway to freestyle it a little bit and to write. I would probably be a little more cautious with some of my statements if I knew they were going out to the full public all the time. That's the truth.
Yeah.
So I've got this limited little group. But anyway, it's Richard Dolan Members, and that does have a lot of free content as well as member content. So, and then I have a YouTube channel, which I think is just called Richard Dolan, or YouTube Richard M. Dolan, or something like that. It's easy to YouTube search it. And I do put out content, often with my wife Tracy, and often alone. I'll do solo things a couple of times a week usually. So I've been busy, and actually I have to say, this is a great time in the UFO field to be active. There's a lot going on. I don't know if anyone can truly predict where this is going to lead. And I'm not saying it's going to lead toward disclosure.
Right.
I actually don't think so. But I do think that there's a permanent forward motion that we've just had. And I guess the question that I ask myself these days is, will we get to a point where we hit some kind of critical mass in which what we're seeing now becomes harder and harder to control, where you get a kind of avalanche effect? I don't know if that will happen in the near future, but I have to say this, I could not, more than 2 years ago, I would not have been able to predict where we are right now. This totally caught me by surprise.
It's been an incredible journey in these last few years to be able to see how much this has expanded. It's touched more people's lives than ever, and you've done an amazing job of providing some incredibly useful resources to these people. So I like to think that when we work together, we're finding out new things, we're making new discoveries, and we won't know if we don't go. And you've done just that. You're helping to provide this, to help substantiate otherwise very outlandish things to most people in a very practical way. So, Richard, it's been a great honor to be able to have you come out.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. What I love, I just in closing say what I like the most about what you said there is working together. And that's really what we have to do. Like, I do the things that I can do, and I love doing it, by the way. And you're doing what you can do. And there's people watching this, and they're going to be doing what they can do. And all I would say is let's try to be careful, cautious, but also brave. Like, we've got to be all of those things and follow the evidence and analyze it, be critically minded, but also be brave enough to accept conclusions when the evidence points that way.
That's just it. Well, thank you so much for your time here
Thanks
today.
a lot. It was great.
It's important
Loved
to
it.
keep an open mind. Again, we need to work together to figure this thing out, and we'll see you in the Vortex.
If you liked this video, be sure to check out our other content and get connected on our page and social media sites. Every day, new discoveries are being made all across the world and beyond, so let's work together to find out what's next. And remember, we won't know if we don't go. I'll see you in the Vortex.